Well, welcome everybody, and for joining today's AMI in Conversation. This series involves bringing together professional marketers to share their career journeys, their industry experience, and their exceptional achievements, as we'll cover today. I'm Andrew Thornton, the Executive Director of the AMI, and it's my pleasure to host this session today. Now, joining me is Tony Quarmby, the Executive General Manager of Marketing for Tourism Northern Territory. And Tony was also the AMI's Chief Marketing Officer of the Year in 2020. So welcome, Tony.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. I believe you're in Alice Springs today, so.
I am, yes. I travelled down from Darwin yesterday and couldn't be better weather. It's nice and chill in the air in the mornings and lovely and warm during the day.
Yes, well, I'm in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales and it's pouring rain and gusty wind, so quite a contrast there. So. Anyhow, now before we get into the session, a reminder for everybody who's dialed in, please add your questions, and we will be having, as we go through, and we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the discussion with Tony. All right, let's start, and probably a good place to start, Tony, is at the beginning. I mean, what inspired you to get into the field of marketing in the first place?
I hate to say I can remember that long ago, but I think business in general interested me as I was progressing through college into university. And I think it was more the psychological area of marketing, really understanding consumer behavior, how to trigger that behavior, how to meet their wants and needs in a way that you can get them to really act and trigger their movements in terms of moving down a consumer journey. That really piqued my interest. But of course, I think like a lot of younger marketers at the time, I liked the perceived excitement, the creating the ads, seeing your work up on a big screen. I think that really sucked me in those early days as well.
And your career path, I mean, how did you get from starting out in marketing and ending up into your current role?
Well, luckily I had some time off in between when I had college and then went to university. So I had time to think about what I wanted to do in my career, and traveling around the world, I think really opened my eyes to the extent of what job opportunities there are out there globally. And I ended up, after I graduated, in New Zealand, and ended up actually promoting New Zealand's industries to global investment partners and trying to get partnerships going that way. Then moved into the TV industry. I wanted to see, that little bit of excitement that I dreamed about in those early days. And then fell back into a real comfort zone for me, which was tourism, because in my global travels, tourism was one of those jobs that I picked up, front of end staff in hotels and bars and those sort of things. So getting to represent a destination really appealed to me at the time. And since then it's been, representing destinations in New Zealand, Queensland, Sunshine Coast, Tasmania, and most recently Northern Territory.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I guess the category of tourism is one of those things that appeals to quite a lot of marketers, and a fairly tightly held sort of sector of the market, I would suspect.
Yeah, even on the low days, you got to look at yourself and think, well, I'm promoting people's dreams. I'm promoting what people dream about all year long. I could be promoting insurance, probably not in the same category of their dreaming.
No, that's true. That's true. And now, last year, Tourism Northern Territory won the AMI Campaign of the Year award. And I understand the campaign, if I could use that term, was actually a series of campaigns and activities as part of an overarching program. I guess to start the discussion today, what inspired the program, and what was the need that really drove the creation of the program in the first place?
Yeah, well, it was all about the perception. And as most Australians will know, that they've got a perception already in their minds about what the territory has to offer in terms of holiday destination. But back in 2013, we did some research, and what we found was not only were we on the back end of a 7-year decline in terms of tourism visitation, one of those reasons was a negative and a dated perception of the territory, especially the top end. So that's not an easy thing to change, especially with a limited budget and a huge audience, to try and update their perceptions and move them into the positive space if they were already in the negative space. So that was what was really driving us. But you know, you can come up with campaigns, and most marketers know that changing a perception through a campaign takes a long time. So we really had to think about how we could do this to meet the short-term needs, but also the long-term needs. I was at the time in conversation with a producer called Glenn Condy, and he was off the back of a recent web series called Plonk. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about, you know, some spoof, you know, TV show making a documentary about wine makers and wine travelers. So he was talking about doing something, you know, in the same realm, not wine, obviously, for the territory, but in that same realm. Didn't really meet our needs. But what I saw in Glenn was a character with enthusiasm, open to ideas, had the ability to be flexible and really meet a brief which I gave him in terms of, you know, the perception changing needs that I have. He went back to his team, which consisted of a couple of writers, Josh Tyler and Miranda Tapsell at the time, and they came up with a script and a narrative. We worked that, we brainstormed ideas, we went back and forth until finally they landed on what they were saying at the time, long form content. But that long form content in the final rendition turned out to be a movie. My job then was, how could I take that perception changing inspiration that the movie could create and move them down the customer funnel, converting them into an actual traveler, but also changing their perception in the long term. And that's where Location Scouts, which was the web series we created at the time, which was integrated into the film, and the overarching marketing campaign came about. So it really took people from, took them outside the theatres into a digital environment. We could then collect their consumer data, we could retarget them, get them planning, get them booking, and get them traveling. And it was that sort of real integration that was the unique element to this whole project.
And how did so internally within Northern Territory Tourism, what was the initial reaction around the concept? Because it was quite a bold shift in terms of what you were trying to achieve.
It was tough. I had a vision. Glenn had a vision. Miranda and Josh had a movie concept, and they were passionate. Luckily, Miranda's from the territory, so you know she got what we were trying to do, and the story, if you've seen the film, you know, was really her story to tell. But yeah, there was a lot of naysayers, a lot of people I had to convince. One of the challenges, I think, long term was keeping that enthusiasm up, because creating a film, creating a movie is a long-term project, and there are a lot of challenges that I came to realize when making a film that throw themselves up and you have to overcome. So keeping that enthusiasm up was paramount. But also, you know, we had stakeholders that constantly kept changing. You know, the government is our ultimate, you know, stakeholder for Tourism NT, but ministers kept changing. They kept coming in, coming out. So convincing every new minister of the value to keep on track, to keep this project moving, you know, became a bit of a challenge in itself.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the stakeholder side of things, because obviously in a project like this, you need quite a high degree of collaboration, but also you need to influence them to keep them on board. I mean, what sort of mechanisms did you use to influence the ministers, for example?
Luckily, I think, you know, this comes down to that, you know, really understanding human behaviour. The ministers are no different than anyone else. They see, when they can see visually the idea, they're much more likely to buy in. So what I talked through with Glenn and Josh and Miranda, and we actually brought them up to the territory, and they made almost like a draft commercial for the movie. So they went around to some of the locations, they built in some of the storylines, and we created a draft TV commercial for the film. And that's what I used as a visual buy-in for any minister, the board, the CEO at the time, to really get them on board, because they could then visualize what I and the wider team were passionate about.
Oh, fantastic idea. And obviously was very effective. obviously, with the program is extensive of this, there's obviously a number of challenges that come up. Would you be able to outline some of the challenges that you came up against, and more importantly, how you overcame them?
Yeah, yeah, there were a lot of challenges. It was probably the most complex and challenging marketing project I've ever worked on. I think the first one that was all the way through the project was meeting the immediate needs of the business at the same time as keeping the target on those long-term goals, which was very much around changing that perception. So we had to, build in different milestones in terms of showing the ministers, showing the board, the impact we were having in terms of the stages we were reaching, the potential of what was to come, and really keeping them engaged, keeping them across the wins that we were receiving, even though we weren't able to actually, talk about them in public. Another challenge was the breaking the new ground. Basically, we were stepping out of our comfort zone in terms of tourism marketing, and the production, the distributor, the marketing company behind that movie, which was E1, then it turned into Universal. They were stepping out of their comfort zone in terms of how to promote a destination. Their focus is always getting people into the box office, getting those theatre revenues up and people watching the film. That then generates revenue for the investors in the movie. Our target was not revenue generation. Our target was perception changing and visitation on the ground following the film's inspiration. So completely out of their comfort zone. And we really had some creative challenges when we went to market to what we wanted to try and do, which was revolutionary in the movie making space, versus what they wanted to do. I mean, one of their ideas for their promotions was to create cardboard cutouts and put them in the foyers of theatres. Not exactly what we were considering innovative marketing. Yeah. So it was an interesting journey in that respect. There was a big risk in terms of budget. If anybody's listening out there that's tried to make a film, receiving investment to pay for the entire production is a challenging business, and it takes a long time. And that really put me into my uncomfort zone, because I wasn't used to waiting so long and so many trials getting those investors across. Plus we had to put the initial seed money in for the production company to go out and get the investors. So we had some monetary risk on the table. And like I mentioned before, keeping that enthusiasm up over that long period, it's a challenge. Most campaigns are over within three to 6, maybe 9 months, at the most a year. This took us 5 years from an initial concept through to actual theatres. So yeah, that was just some of the challenge. Oh, one more, probably one of the most important, was we had to take a back seat. In terms of tourism NT, we couldn't be seen to be involved in the film, because that would take the authentic, organic legitimacy from the story, and people would become, it would become more obviously a tourism ad than a film. So we had to step away. We weren't seen as being involved in any of the launch, in any of the actual movie itself. You won't see any branding. You won't see us overtly being, recognized, acknowledged, until at least, I think it was a year after the film had hit cinemas, before we started talking about how we were involved in the project.
Geez, you must have been pretty patient to hang around for 12 months after the event. The urge would have been to be out there on the front foot, I could imagine.
Yeah, the ministers always want those good news stories, and as much as we tried to give this good news stories from the theatres, and lots of awards globally, both from Location Scouts, the web series, and the film. So they were great, but we couldn't talk too much about how we were involved in the storyline and the story generation and the actual milestones in creating that narrative.
Yeah, and you talked about the primary objective was about changing perceptions and attitudes. How did you set about working out how we're going to measure success? Setting the KPIs, how you're going to measure the return on investment, and so on.
Yeah, well, it was multifaceted. because the project wasn't just one campaign, wasn't one element, you had a film, you had a web series in terms of location scouts, and you had a marketing campaign that overarched the whole project. So each one had different success measures, different KPIs. So if we talk about the film, obviously that was box office revenue. How many people can we get to see the film? What's the box office revenue? We ended up being the second largest grossing Australian movie in 2019. So, in terms of those KPIs, we definitely smashed those. We were featured at the Sundance Film Festival. We've won multiple awards across the globe in terms of the storyline and the cinematography. So great success there. Then when you talk about location scouts, now location scouts was developed and filmed at the same time as the movie, and it integrated the characters and the actors and actresses. But the whole point of the web series was to take that theatre goer, that audience, into a digital environment. Once we got them into a digital environment, we could start collecting data on the consumer, we could start retargeting them, we could start actually knowing who they are and how we could then motivate them with the marketing campaign. So that was all about engagement, views, and collecting the consumer data. Then the marketing campaign is obviously much more obvious. That's around, not only awareness, but engagement of the consumers, the data, the conversion. And we had retail partners connected into that marketing campaign. So they were actually converting sales to the Northern Territory as part of that marketing campaign. And Channel 9 was one of our key media partners, and they jumped on board with gusto. The Today Show were featuring it, and not only did they feature it as part of a paid campaign, but they loved the content so much, they made, I think it was at least twice, maybe 3 times as much content, through the show, because the actual, the content was something the viewers wanted to see, something they wanted to get involved with. So in terms of a Channel 9 partnership, it smashed those targets. And of course, on the ground, that's where it really, you really had to make the difference. The visitation we saw by the end of the financial year in 2019, we saw a 24% growth in leisure visitation to the territory. And the majority of that was off the back of the film. We could find that out because of the retail partners that were involved, and making sure that as we talked to them about their sales and what their customers were where they were coming from and what was motivating them, they would come back with feedback, such as one from a tour operator who operates the tours from Darwin across the ferry into the Tiwi Islands. They took a group there, and they started asking them when they got to the church, and that was the final scene in the wedding. When they got to the church, they would talk about the history of the church and the cultural significance to the local Indigenous people. And then they would turn around and say, well, it's also now famous for being the church in the top end wedding. How many of you have seen the movie and were actually motivated to come here to see it? 75% of people in those tours kept putting their hand up. So it really worked on the ground. It really worked for that short-term visitation. And of course, since the movie was launched, the perception measures we've got in place saw them have taken off. So across the board, I think, yeah, undoubtedly it was a huge success for us.
It's amazing. The whole concept is fantastic, how you've integrated so many sort of different medium and different mechanisms to come together. Do you think it would have been as successful if you weren't able to do the complete package around the campaign or the program?
Obviously, we'll never know because it all did work. But I think the initial raising the awareness of the film itself, I think that really put it front and center and top of people's minds. It created a different audience by bringing in a web series as well, a younger audience who's not necessarily aligned to going to the cinema or seeing, I guess you could call it a bit of a chick flick, a love story. We got a broader audience from that. So I think in that respect, it was definitely successful. But when you hear the critics talk about the film, one of the things I'm most proud of is that they said, the supporting cast was the destination. The backdrops, the locations. That was one of the supporting actresses within the movie, because it was so impressive and so influential to the storyline. And that was down to obviously the director Wayne Blair and the cast and the crew capturing the destination in such an impressive and inspirational way.
So another good measure of success, looking at it from an AMI perspective, was that at last year's AMI Awards for Marketing Excellence, not only did Northern Territory Tourism win the Campaign of the Year, you also collected awards for Content Marketing, which was the National Award, Creativity and Brand Product and Services Marketing at the state level, Integrated Marketing Communications Program at the state level, and I think you also picked up an Umbrella Award for that. And not forgetting, you were awarded CMO of the Year. Now, with those set of accolades, I mean, how did the team within Northern Territory Tourism and your stakeholders, I mean, how did they react to getting such accolades?
Obviously, it was pride. We, at the time of the awards came along, we'd obviously moved on to the next thing. We had new challenges. COVID was actually in full flow at the time. So we were in full, the travel industry's just been smashed by COVID. So we were in full mitigation mode of that. So they'd moved on in terms of their headspace, but to then take a step back, remember what they went through, remember the acknowledgement they got when the campaign was a success. That really was what the awards were about, to reward the team and give them a chance to take a breath and celebrate what they achieved.
Yeah, because it'd been quite a journey for them, hadn't it, over that 5-year period?
Yeah, completely. And we'd had staff come in and leave and others come in and take part. So we had so many people that were involved that probably weren't even with us at the end stage, that, they deserve a lot of the accolades as well. So hopefully they feel a bit of ownership around those awards, even though they're no longer with us. Yeah.
And what about yourself being named the Chief Marketing Officer of the Year? How'd you feel about that recognition?
Well, it was a surprise. It was obviously, being recognised for the work. I couldn't be prouder of that. But I think, I think I got a lot of satisfaction that my belief, my enthusiasm, my tenacity with the project, to stay with it for so long and to believe in the outcomes and believe that we would be a success, getting that acknowledgement, getting that reward, that was probably what it meant most for me.
Yeah, brilliant. And there's a number of people who have tuned in today to watch our sort of discussion here, who would be contemplating entering the awards in 2021. What advice would you give them to in terms of framing up their submission and putting the entry in?
Yeah, I think you've got to realise the judges, not only do they see many, many submissions, but year after year, there'll be a lot of similarity. And, that part of what we did with this campaign was tell a story. And I think that's what you've got to do with these submissions. Realise that if you can tell a story to the judges, the panels, and then take them on that journey that you went on. Of course, data and the stats are important to give it credence and to give it, legitimacy and to show the success, but build them into the narrative. It can all work as one big story. So each one of the categories I took as a challenge of, let's tell the story we went through, step by step with different, challenges and different barriers that we overcame. And like any good story, you have to finish with a good ending, a good happy ending that will really, leave the judges with a warm feeling that, they've just been on that journey with you. I think if you can do that, you're going to stand out from the field.
Yeah, and clearly you did with your submission. I mean, it was a fantastic campaign and fantastic program, but it obviously inspired the judges to single you out to be named Campaign of the Year. So my congratulations on that. I actually think the body work's fantastic. So again, congratulations. Now I think we're at the time where we're going to do question and answer. So hopefully people have submitted their questions for Tony. And somewhere Tegan's controlling the questions, so we'll get them up on the screen. Here we go. So the first question, Tony, what was the brainstorming process like to come up with the concepts, and how long did it take?
The brainstorming was, and all credit to Glenn Condy, Josh Tyler, and Miranda. They made the process really engaging. Their enthusiasm for the project and their ability to take on board Arnie's as a destination marketing body was I've not seen that in many partnerships. Their ability to build into the narrative the core elements that we wanted in the storyline. Like, we wanted it to get out and about and around the top end and showcase as much as possible. We wanted it to be a positive experience for the indigenous culture that's up there. We wanted it to be female friendly because they were the decision makers around holiday decisions primarily. And we wanted it to, obviously change perception. So we had to show the modern metropolitan, feel of the town of Darwin itself, and surprise and delight people with what they didn't know. So we had to really shatter that perception. And that brainstorming process was created. They visited Alice Springs. I went down to Sydney, and we really took weeks refining it, and they kept coming back and we refined it some more, and they kept coming back and we refined it some more. So, they were great to deal with. And anybody wanting, to learn how to pull narrative together, to learn to be able to tell a story, Josh Tyler started a consultancy, so he's available to walk you through that journey as he did with me and the others in the group.
Oh, fantastic. The next question is, how big was the team you had working on the campaign? And I'm assuming the question is the team within marketing, but also with a program like this, it goes across the whole organisation, I understand. So how big was the team that was involved in it?
On our side, directly working with us, we probably had any one time anything from 5 to 10 people working on the project. So, when it came down to the launch, our PR team was involved, the digital team was involved, making sure we had the content on the website. We had our core marketing team running the campaign. And then, we also had the international team focusing on the international rollout where and when we could in terms of the distribution of the movie globally. So there was a lot of people, and I'd say maybe even up to 20 when you look at the rep teams in our different countries. But when I talk about team, I don't just think about the people working with Tourism NT. I think about the wider team, our agencies, such as, at the time we were working with a media agency who pulled together the 9 partnership. I regarded them at the time as part of our team. Of course, Glenn, Josh, Miranda, they were part of the team. Screen Territory, Goalpost Pictures. It was such a family feeling because everybody was passionate about that. So yeah, I think there was too many people to count that were involved in making that a success.
You use the word passion. That's obviously the thing that gelled the whole team together when you have such a large number of people involved in such a campaign. Yeah,
and you had to believe, everybody that was involved in it had to believe that what they were doing was going to make a difference, was going to impact people on an emotional level, and we did. It was good.
Here's a question from David, who said, did you reflect on the impact of Crocodile Dundee to Northern Territory tourism when conceptualising the movie, in relation to the centrepiece? Yeah,
interesting enough, when the research was done initially about, why was the territory on a decline in terms of leisure tourism visitation, a lot of the feedback came back of, I want to go one day, but I'm worried about the territory because, I've seen Crocodile Dundee and there's not much there and it's dangerous, and I want to go somewhere where I have a warm bed to sleep in or a comfortable bed, and I want to be able to get internet, and you haven't got hotels out there. So what it created was great awareness for the territory and its natural attributes, but it didn't do anything in terms of what the real experience is from a holiday point of view. So we did take on board all the positives from Crocodile Dundee, but then we brought in all the nuances we needed to get across but kept that nature, that wilderness, that adventurous spirit that Crocodile Dundee put in place. And, you know, all credit to Crocodile Dundee, it put the territory on the map in its day. It's just we've moved on. It was 30, 40 years, you know, we've moved on now, and we need to reflect how Darwin and the territory has moved on.
Yeah. Another question is, if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
I think we would have worked with the production company and the marketing agency that they brought on to promote the film globally. I think we would have worked with them earlier on how to roll it out and what our vision was for the marketing concept, because that was a lot of creative difference there. And what that meant was we got closer and closer to launch day, and those tensions were still there. We still hadn't locked down what we couldn't do within the rights of the film footage, and when they wanted us to go out with the location scouts. So there's a lot of tension as we were coming up to launch. And I think if we'd have got on board and even more, probably even put it into the contract exactly how it's going to be formed, it would have saved a lot of that stress as the launch came up.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you worked on a tight budget. We have a question here, which is about an indication of what sort of investment was made in the whole campaign.
We did the seed funding, which at the time spread over a 3-year milestone payments was around 500,000. So over 3 years, 500,000. We saw a 3 times return on our investment just from the production value when they came to shoot in the territory. So that created a lot of employment, a lot of jobs locally. Of course, they used hotels, rental vehicles, they used restaurants, they used supermarkets, all the hospitality. All of that expenditure goes to an economic return, which we measure. So just for the production value itself, we hit a 3-to-1 investment. And that's before we start talking about the campaign and visitation and the economic contribution from visitor expenditure, which blew that number off the table in terms of our investment into the film. One of the side effects has obviously been, because we've invested, because it was such a huge success, I think a lot of production houses, a lot of producers, a lot of filmmakers think now we've got this big bucket of money that we'll throw into movies because that's how it works. It's not how it works. It's, you know, we had a very loose storyline that we fed into at the earliest point. Nobody came to us with a script and said, you know, we just need funding for this movie. We think it will drive visitation. It took us, years to get a storyline locked in, investors on board. So coming to us, expecting us to invest in films and productions now, without it meeting our needs from a narrative and storyline, they often get disappointed from what they think they'll get in terms of an investment from us.
Yeah. A question that's just come through, sort of following on from that, is, are we to understand correctly that you used investors to essentially fund the campaign?
Yes. So the investors funded the film. We funded the marketing around the film. We also funded location scouts, the production of the web series. So the film itself, as I said, we were a seed funding partner, but we were one, I'm not even sure of the final funding for it, but, you know, we were a small part of that funding for the entire film. And then it was around, you know, the media partnerships and the filming of the location scouts, which, you know, we had a separate budget for that to build.
A question just sort of tying into that sort of thing is, did you get unlimited access to assets? And the example given is sort of other footage, B-roll, etc., to use in the marketing?
Not unlimited, no. Obviously, the film itself, it needs it needs the rights to that footage. So what we did manage to do, though, was, because we had location scouts filming at the same time, and we had Miranda and Wayne Blair, the director, you know, and the cast and crew, Gwilym Lee, you know, that they were all on board. So we shot a lot of the footage at the same time as the film. So we had ownership on that footage. We had the ability to use that footage to create that connection with the film. Plus, you know, really, when the film's out there, it's kind of doing what we want it to do anyway. When they show clips of the film, or you see the film on Netflix or on TV now, we don't need to make an ad. The film's the ad. So, you know, the footage is getting out there, whether we've got it or not.
Tegan, do we have any more questions? No? I have one more question actually before we close. With such a successful campaign, where do you go next? Because, you know, do you say, oh well, we've got to top this, or we've got to do something different? You know, where do you go with it? Yeah,
I'm very competitive, so I always want to beat what I've created or done before. So right now we're focusing on rebounding from COVID. That's thrown up more challenges in a year than we would go through in a decade. So it's really working with the industry to make sure their businesses, their tourism businesses survive, we get enough visitation, and then we rebound as quick as possible. But I do have ideas and other things bubbling away in the background that as soon as we can get you know, ourselves back on our feet as an industry, then we can start playing in that creative field again, that innovative field. I think it's always going to be a driver for me to do something different, to do something no one's done before. And I'll always keep pushing the boundaries and pushing my bosses to take that journey to be brave with me.
So I guess it's a case of watch this space and see what comes up.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Exactly. Tony, thanks so much for your time. I've really enjoyed having our conversation, and all the best for whatever the next thing is. I think given COVID situation, tourism should be booming up in the territory. So that's good luck in terms of where to next. And before we sign off, I just want to remind people that if you're looking to put an entry into the AMI Awards for Excellence this year, that entries close on the 30th of April, so you've got a little bit of time. And who knows, you could be interviewed by me. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, but you certainly could be up on the winner's circle with the likes of Tony. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for those who posted the questions, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye, everyone.